Neil, how's Costas?
Yeah, it's okay. Still
Yep.
there.
How's business been this past quarter? Because I know some places have noticed a sort of like a reduction on what they were expecting, but others seem to have done quite well. Don't know, without mentioning any figures, but just what's your feeling on the way things are going at the moment?
The last quarter had been good. It was yeah. We are sort of benchmarking against the 2019-20 up to the end of this financial year. So it was actually better than, because we had sort of remodeled the whole operating style and all. So I guess even the bottom line is looking a bit better.
Ah, that's good. Yeah. That's good. That's good.
No, the unfortunate thing is that there's more businesses around here been closing over the last number of weeks, so decline is continuing. The businesses that are still operating are probably not doing what they were previously doing. The cost of living crisis, staffing seems to still be a huge problem.
Yeah, I think staffing is still the number one problem in the industry at the moment. Just finding enough bodies to actually, it's I've seen. I mean, there's certain areas of the country where it's almost like a bidder's market, and I've seen a lot of movement in one hotel I work with where it's literally they get offered 10 pence more at somewhere else and they're off, and it's a constant movement of personnel just because everybody's trying to get the best, the sort of got the opportunity really to get the best rate, for their hour, as it were, because there's such a demand.
Yeah.
Hi there, Simon.
Hi, morning everyone. How you doing?
All right, you?
Yeah, very well, thank you.
Good.
Very well. Yeah, it is a definite employees market, isn't it, Robin?
Yes, to say the least. It's yeah, the ones who are good can demand a decent wage.
I've seen some that aren't even very good demanding it and getting a good wage, which is more worrying.
Yeah, it's a scenario, isn't it, where if you're desperate, you take on anybody and at any price, really.
Yeah. Morning, Mr. B.
Morning. We had this thing registered for that certificate of sponsorship and all, and we did get a couple of guys from overseas. It's a costly venture.
Yeah.
But at least they have a 3-year visa. Hopefully they'll hang around. And I think the minimum pay that you have to give is very close to 26,000 per annum. But they're motivated, they're good. So far these two have been good. So this is basically, to plug the holes in the thing.
And is there like an obligation they have to be with you during the contract period?
I don't think so. I think we are creating that fable, but I don't think it'll stand legally. I'm sure they're free to go if they so want. But I think there will be a cost which has to be incurred by them as well, to be fair, which is quite hefty. They have to spend at least a couple of £1,000 in terms of solicitor's fee and all that. It's not plain Jane that you just resign from here and go to another place, because they are here on the basis of that certificate of sponsorship. So they have to find out another hotel which has, and there will be some cost involved, definitely.
Okay, so
that saved our buttery bread was that some of the couple of hotels here are accommodating the Ukrainian refugees. So
yeah, Robin, I was just thinking that I've got a friend who, strangely, he lives just around the corner from me, and he runs an agency that specializes in bringing staff in from India, Pakistan, Dubai, wherever, Philippines. And yeah, it's there's some cost to it, a couple of thousand or so. You have to get
3,500 at the end of the day.
Is it right? But so they take you through every step of the process to get the government approved license that you need to bring people in, but then they also have lots of contacts in you know, those parts of the world. And actually, I put them in touch with 3 clients now, and I think is that Mark Staples, the Mark Staples on the call. Mark Staples of PSL. If it is, one of his clients has been helped by this particular business, and I was racking my brains to think what they're called, and they're called Elite Pick,
Elite
and
Pick.
they're based in Birmingham. And as I say, I've had 2 or 3 clients that have used them successfully.
And interest, I suppose, once you've got the license, can you take? Once you've paid the cost of the license, does it cost more to have more than one person, or once you've got the license, you can then sort of have 2 or 3 people, and it doesn't cost you actually anymore?
I think you've still got the cost of the agency to, you know, locate and bring these people across. But once you've got the government approved license, you're good to go.
Okay.
The license is virtually free of cost. It's a very nominal expenditure as long as you get an approval.
Yeah.
They at the state that they give you a quota that you have a license to bring in so many people. But we got 1. So we were surprised after 1, but then we were told by solicitors that this 1 is actually nothing. They can sort of use multiple ones if possible. But the 1 sort of an acknowledgement that yes, we can get it. The main cost comes is the cost of applying, you know, the documentation for whoever you are trying to bring in, and then your own cost to the solicitors. And
I'll say if a cost is every time you bring somebody in, really.
Yes.
Okay.
But then there's a cost to bringing people in via traditional, you know, UK-based recruitment agencies anyway.
Yeah.
And the one thing that, well, guys and girls that are coming in from India, they've got incredible hospitality colleges and universities out there. The training is superb. I've worked with no end of Indian chefs, and most of them, 90% of them, are so conscientious. You know, really highly skilled. You know, really nice people as well. You know,
I suppose it's kind of more of a sort of management or sub-management role that you sort of, because to sort of look to fill with a sort of people, would you say, or is it just sort of, I mean, well, I suppose works out at about £12 an hour, which these days isn't that much, is it?
Yeah, senior chef de parties and above, really, I think. And then front of house managers.
And they are motivated because they know that the investment will be paid off within the 3 years time, because the pay over here, even if they come for 3 years, would be almost what they would get over there it will be more than double.
And have you ended up having to give them accommodation, or have they just found somewhere to live in?
No, we'd have to. We fortunately have a few flats, so we give them on a flat share basis. We give a room in a flat, but for that they are paying the normal deductions, you know, whatever it is.
I think that is part of the approval process, that you provide them with initial accommodation, because that pub owned by the England cricketers up in Leicester, Loughborough area, he brought in 3 guys from India, and he organized the tenancy agreement on a flat in Melton Mowbray, but he then, you know, charged the guys part of that rent. If you want me to send you an introduction, Robin.
Go ahead, because it might even be interesting to have them give a presentation on the forum, just so.
You know what? That's a really good idea. After this, I'll ring him and ask him.
Yeah, because these days it's getting harder and harder to find decent people because there's a limited amount of people in the country, isn't there?
Yeah.
That are, especially those who are actually willing and of the caliber that to work in the industry. It's something I've always said. I worked in Spain for 16 years, and over there it was like, it's a profession and everything. Everybody considers it almost like, an honor to be working in the profession, where over here still got such a bad image that people don't want to work in it. And it's a shame, really, because if you like the industry, it's a good place to work. But yeah. So Simon, now that I've got you as well, how are we getting on with the suppliers these days? What's the situation in the markets?
I think not too bad. I think there's still going to be some cost pressures from manufactured products. So thinking about the stuff that you buy from Brakes and Bidfood, because of the processes involved, the energy required to make those products. But and yes, there is still cost pressures in the likes of meat and fish areas, with feed costs really high, and labor costs as well. All of those things that we've just been talking about are absolutely reflected in the wholesale market. They're having to pay top dollar to get their drivers and warehouse operatives and all the rest of it. So it's nowhere near as bad as it was, but I think it will probably still just trickle up a little bit over the next 4 to 6 months. But it really is a bit of a crystal ball job.
And is this bird flu thing affecting a lot? Because obviously, I mean, we used to import so many chickens from Poland that it was
Poland, France.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, it was really bad. We always have it. It's always here every year, but last year was particularly bad. A lot of the meat suppliers were talking about 50% of the French product was having to be culled.
So it's not just the UK then, because when you look at the press, it's always like the UK have a bird flu problem. But
I don't think we have it as bad as they do on the continent, to be quite honest. But because we do import such a lot of chicken poultry products, it affected us as well. So yeah, it's very real. Yeah, turkey was significantly higher in December than previous year. Poultry's probably been the biggest percentage increase of any of the meats in the last year. From what was a cheap product, relatively cheap product. So your chicken supreme was £1.20. It's now £1.80. But yeah, beef and lamb and pork, probably increased, 10%.
There's still a huge problem in France with AI. They've had to cull 50% of their duck and their geese in the main producing area, and it's not going to go away. It'll just get worse.
It will go away when the weather improves, Mark, I guess, won't it?
They're saying with these new strains, potentially it won't.
Right.
Tricky times. And welcome to the forum, Mark.
Pleasure.
It's a bit of a strange one this time, because I didn't have a chance to get a presentation together from anybody. So it's a bit of a sort of chat and go, as it were. But it's always a pleasure to have new people join us.
Thank you.
Is what Simon says, are you PSL?
No.
Oh.
We were ex-colleagues.
He was.
Ah, right.
Yeah, I was for not quite as long as Simon, but
why can't we see your smiley face, Mark?
Because it's not smiling at the moment.
Come on, fella.
So now I'm commercial director at British Game Assurance. So we assure, promote and develop British game, as in feather and fur, not as in computers.
Yeah, as in game rather than gaming.
Yeah.
And what we were just talking about, the price of, your sort of staples of beef, chicken, lamb, pork going up, Mark, that was a perfect opportunity for you to tell us that the game hasn't experienced quite.
Well, feathered went up traditionally about 50–60% of eggs, poults, day olds are used to come from France. So last year, France had a ban because of AI on export of eggs. Strangely enough, only to the UK. They could still export within Europe. So that led to a real issue with partridge in particular. The partridge season starts 1st of September, and you need a minimum of 16 weeks between hatch and release. So really the partridge season was very late and short, which led to prices going up. But certainly, venison it should be incredibly good value against red meat protein, especially with this new. The government have launched a paper to say that they are going to cull 2 million deer, which is way overdue because they're a bloody menace. People don't realise that the damage they cause not only to crops and natural habitat, but also to cars as well, with the number of accidents that there are. But most wholesale catering butchers just fix venison price to beef. So if beef goes up 10%, then they'll put venison up by 10%.
And if there is a cull, will it actually go to the market, or will it, like some of these stories whereby they'll just end up burning the carcasses or something daft like that?
They can't do that, because that would be a huge own goal. We're still waiting to hear what they're going to do, because the stalkers obviously want to maximise the amount of money that they get paid for carcass. So during the pandemic, venison whole carcass dead weight price went down to about 75–85p a kilo, which is the same price that it was in 1979, with no allowance for inflation. So actually cheaper by the time you put inflation. But what we're obviously waiting to see is what the government are going to do, because if the stalkers aren't getting a decent price for carcass, then they're not going to shoot them. So there might have to be something like an intervention. For those of you that have been around a while, you might remember the EU intervention, the beef mountain, the butter mountain, the milk lake, etc., etc. So there will probably have to be some way that they can artificially keep the price up, but it will still have to drop at some stage, because they will have to release that product onto the market.
Could be this an answer to the cost of a living crisis?
Well, it is part of it. We got game into the NHS last year, and the venison in particular is going very, very well, and it's a direct supply from one of the big venison game dealers. And actually, there was a lot of rock throwing to start with, because people just presume that venison, because of its historic status, is an expensive meat. Actually, it's not.
No.
So it's one of the crusades that I'm on at the moment, trying to see if some of the catering butchers will be a little bit more genuine about selling price.
Because
Because venison hasn't gone up really in real terms.
And,
But as I said,
it's also a natural, wild and sustainable product, isn't it? That
as long as we don't overdo it, like we do tend to do everything else.
well, the problem is that even if they cull the 2 million, there'll still be, I think it's about another 4 million on top. And it is, as Simon said, it is sustainable. It is natural, and it also, people don't realise. They think of Bambi with deer, but they don't realise the damage they do to natural habitats. They kill trees, so they actually destroy woodland because they eat the bark off the trees, which obviously then kills the tree. You'll quite often see them, in particular this time of year when the rape fields are growing, that they'll just crop across the top of rape fields and eat the hearts out of the rape, and then the farmers have to re-drill. And I think it was, and this is Forestry Commission telling me these stats, so I have to doff my cap and say that there was something like in 2020, there were 70,000 accidents in the UK involving collisions with deer.
And from a marketing point of view, from people, is there any kind of stigma, because of also like the fur trade got knocked on the head because of because of sort of like people not wanting fur and all rest. Is there any stigma behind sort of like game and venison, or people have got over the fact that sort of it's just another form of meat, and actually we've been eating it for centuries?
There is, it has dropped significantly, and I think one of the big stigmas that goes across the whole game sector is the use of lead shot. There is a voluntary plan within the industry to phase it out over 5 years, which the 5 years ends in 25. Personally, I think it should be brought forward, but that's my own personal opinion. Because obviously retailers, and they're the ones with the big numbers, they will not have anything shot with lead on their shelves at all. And we've made quite good strides with venison. Feather is slightly dragging along behind, but venison is now passing more into mainstream as there are a lot more products developed with it. There's still a load of myths that we need to debunk, that you need to marinate venison for 24, 48 hours in red wine before you use it. But and pheasant used to be hung for days to strengthen the flavor. It's not hung now at all. It's, it hits the ground, goes into a chiller on the shoots, and then collected by game dealers. And as people try the meat, they realize that it's, the people say, oh, it's going to be gamey. And when you ask them what does gamey mean, they say, oh, it's a strong flavor. Venison isn't a particularly strong flavor. And whatever you do with beef, you can do with venison. Whatever you do with chicken, you can do with pheasant and partridge. You just got to adjust the cooking times. but lower in fat, lower in cholesterol, higher in selenium. So there's a lot of debunking still to do. But as we develop an increased range of products to take game all year round, because unfortunately, a lot of hospitality people still believe that you can only use feather and venison as well in the winter season. You know, venison is shot all year round. Or produced all year round. Deer are shot all year round. So, you know, we've developed with processors, game burgers, game sausages, game pies, probably the best pheasant liver, probably the best parfait I've ever tasted, which is a pheasant liver parfait from a company called Emily's Charcuterie. And it's getting people to realise that game is available 52 weeks of the year.
Certainly sounds like a definite sort of thing for the future, doesn't it? Something that we really need to be looking into, and sort of like the industry really needs to be using more.
Yeah, sorry, can I just ask, Mark, with the pricing, you said about your kind of you're endeavoring to get butchers to be a bit more real in terms of their pricing. Are you talking about trade and direct to consumer? Is everyone just kind of matching in general?
Direct to consumer is quite often a lot easier to sort, because then you're dealing direct with game dealers and producers. But with game, wholesale catering butchers do not process game at all. The days of feather and fur going into a butcher, wholesale catering butcher, now are long over. So you've got a range of game dealers around the UK. Some do both feather and fur. Some specialise in fur, and some specialise in feather, because it's obviously quite messy, quite smelly, and obviously you've got worries, certainly from EHOs, where they're concerned of feather and fur going in. But it's, you know, this bit about beef goes up by 10%, so venison goes up by 10%. Well, venison hasn't gone up like that, and you'll see it, Simon, won't you?
Yeah, I mean, venison loin is usually tagged to beef fillet price.
Yeah.
And probably haunches of venison are tagged to legs of lamb price. And
your average person just who's not a kind of real foodie just chases beef, don't they, in terms of restaurants and things like that. I mean, when we got married, my wife and I, we're not too far from Woburn, where we live, and we got married on Woburn Estate.
Lovely.
And I was absolutely itching to do venison for the wedding meal, but we didn't. And the reason we actually didn't was because of, in terms of 105 people for the wedding meal and the chef cooking it correctly, I was terrified of people saying, "Oh, this is too pink. Can you return it, or can you cook it more?" So that's literally why we didn't do it, just because I think most people just wouldn't have the awareness of it. And we thought, yeah, if we get this great Woburn venison, and some people are sending it back to get cooked more.
They always say that beef and things like that are always the most politically dangerous things to put on a wedding menu, because there's so many different likes to it. It's a tricky one when you're doing mass catering. As duck's always a bad one as well, isn't it? You know, it's sort of whether everybody tends to stick to the pork and chicken.
Mark, I don't know what and Owen, perhaps, I don't know what you think, but I get the sense that there's still a little bit of a sort of snob value to it, and I think I would tend to expect to see venison and game on, you know, better quality hotels and finer gastro pubs rather than, you know, your sort of basic or middle
completely
market.
agree. Completely agree. I wouldn't expect to see it on the average menu at all. This is why it's been quite interesting hearing what Mark said, because I'd have just thought, oh right, yeah, it tends to be out of reach. But I think you're absolutely right. If most places, if you're going to find a bit of pheasant or venison or something like that, you tend to be in one of the best restaurants in the area.
Salt, or one of the nicest dishes I had was at Limewood. Don't know if anyone knows that hotel, but it's absolutely stunning. And it was just a venison ragu, so like bolognese sauce with linguine, and it was stunning, absolutely stunning. Still remember the chef plonking me that plate down and getting tucked into that.
Yeah, and it's a funny one because it's obviously from my side of things, from the wine angle as well. It's obviously beef is your beef and your Malbec kind of thing. You could have a fantastic wine list. You could have dozens of wines on there that could be absolutely perfect with beef and better than the Malbec, and the Malbec might not even be a good one. But again, you put it on there, and like Robin said, something like beef just draws everyone's attention, and something like Malbec does exactly the same thing. So you do on those kind of things, your everyday consumer knows those kind of products, don't they? Whereas, I don't know, you have a tiny bit of education in terms of venison and Syrah, venison and Shiraz, something like that, which tends to be an absolutely amazing combination. If it's paired correctly, it's absolutely unbelievably good. But yeah, again, I think you're right. Venison, this is quite interesting to me. That's why I asked about the trade stuff. I wondered whether chefs were not getting, obviously from what Mark says, the chefs aren't getting a price that on venison that makes them say, look, do you know what, I will try venison on this seasonal menu. I will try venison because actually the price is really good. It's a tough one, definitely, isn't it?
Well, venison has both actually, feather and fur have already started to make that crossover into mainstream hospitality. Traditionally, yes, it was only top end restaurants and hotels that used to feature game on their menus. But obviously, with what happened with the pandemic, which happened to coincide with me starting at British Game Assurance, so I started literally 2 weeks after lockdown. Hospitality was shut, so we had to look at new markets. Retail was one, online was another. But Ivy Group, they had venison tartare on their menu on the run up to Christmas, and their food's good, but that's now hitting mainstream. Drake and Morgan, they did a pheasant BLT. So there are more and more groups out there that are Youngs. They've got it. They've got game on their menu right the way through the season. So it is making that crossover as a mainstream protein. We've still got, as I said, a hell of a load of education to the masses. And if you go on our website, BGA website, and look at Eat Wild in the recipes, there are hundreds of recipes on there that I wanted them all to position game completely differently to where people believe it was. So there's a mallard, which is obviously wild shot duck. There's a mallard pizza. There's venison meatballs with linguine. There's a stunning pheasant macaroni curry, which was I did with Ivor Peters from Urban Raja, and that's got a video on there as well. So there's a whole raft of recipes and menus on there, which we try and get out to as many places. We're starting to try and work with as many schools as possible to help educate them as early as possible. We do a lot of work with Kingsway Westminster College to get them to show game to their chefs and position it away from the traditional can only be served from sort of October through to the end of January, and it's always got to be in a traditional manner, because there are, you know, as you quite rightly pointed out, still lots of myths and legends about it.
And do you think, or are there many game suppliers who have gone almost industrial, as in, you know, sort of finding ways to kill the animal a lot quicker, and whereby it may become almost a case of volume, rather, you know, a supplier will break into the market that rather than looking to sell at a higher price, they'll look to sell at a lower price, because they'll take advantage, for example, of the cull and cull a load of them and want to get a load of it out into the market?
No, all game, wild game.
Mm-hmm.
So there is still quite a bit of farm duck, farm geese. So that's like chicken, you know. It's reared and culled to a price. You know, when you start talking to people, the average life expectancy from egg to plate of a chicken is, depending on where you do your research, is 28 to 35 days. And this bit about free range, where they think Mrs. Miggins is going around letting them out of the chicken coop every morning, and they go around running around the grass and she's out there feeding them corn, is an absolute load of pish. You know, all wild shot game goes into the game dealers dead, you know, whether it be feather or fur. So there are so many different factors with regard to the game dealers getting the right quantity, the right quality. So, for example, ambient air temperature plays a huge role in game bird shooting. So when last couple of seasons, October, November, the ambient air temperature has sort of been, well, 14, 15 and higher degrees. So that puts an awful lot of emphasis on the shoots. So as soon as that bird hits the ground, they get that transferred to the chiller as quickly as possible. Whereas traditionally, you know, they would have been piled up on the various trucks, and at the end of the day, taken down. They wouldn't have seen a chiller. You know, I remember shooting when you'd go into some of the barns and you'd see the birds hanging up, and their necks would be stretching. So there has been a significant change, but obviously dealers, what happens if they don't transfer to the chiller quickly, and the birds are piled up, they heat up, and then in fact they start cooking, and it's what we call green birds, and they have to be rejected by the game dealers. So there's an awful lot of factors that control the number of birds that go in to the game dealers, and obviously it's still pretty manually intensive. So yes, there are automatic eviscerating machines, there are different styles of plucking machines, but the butchery is all still done by hand. I don't know whether any of you have ever been to a chicken production facility where whole birds go in and they come out in packets and very few hands actually touch them. Fascinating to watch, but that still hasn't happened in game yet. So it's still highly labor intensive. And your conversation earlier on about shortage of labor, is absolutely, we've been knocking on the doors of MPs for the last 2 and a bit years to say, you have got to sort these migrant visas out, because game dealers survive during the winter on seasonal migrant workers, because British people won't go in and pluck chickens, pluck pheasants and pull guts out of game birds and then butcher them. They don't want to work in cold, smelly, dirty, for generally just above minimum wage. But obviously the migrant workers, they're quite happy to do it, and they're bloody skilled at it. So it won't, I can't see intensive farming of game birds, pheasant, partridge. There are a few venison farms around, but strangely enough, I know at least 2 in the last 4 years where they used to have wild and farmed, and it used to be 90% farmed, 10% wild. It's now completely the opposite. The consumer is wanting something that's sustainable, that's wild, that's a lot more natural. So they're actually, one of them is actually stopping their farmed, and he's only taking in wild shot venison now. So there are big changes happening out there.
Okay, quite interesting. Very good. Thank you very much, Mark. That was excellent. And Owen, as far as the beverage side of things are concerned, how are we getting? How's the market going? Is our prices slowly going up and up and up, or are there some good deals out there still? Because
yeah, I think generally it has been going up. I think, but it's, I don't know. I think there's been a lot of again, I know you get this, you've got to keep your eyes on things in terms of food as well, but I think in terms of wines and drinks and stuff, I know a lot of people don't pay as much attention to them because they're longer life, but the prices are creeping up in places, not necessarily across the industry, but I think some merchants have been a bit sneaky in terms of price point, and I think I've just done. I'm just about to do a bit of a wine review, a bit of a tender for somebody, and the last time I helped them out was 18 months ago, and it was or nearly 22 months ago now, and I updated the list for them and stuff, and they carried on with it, cracked on with it, and didn't ask me to come back in and help again since. And then, not being too cynical about their supplier, but they've got the same supplier, and all of their bigger volume products in terms of the wines have gone up between, one of them only gone up about 6%, something like that, but all the others have gone up between about 15 and 22% in those 18 months. And I don't think the message was conveyed very clearly at all. And so I've gone back in and had a look at it and gone, whoa, these margins are pretty terrifying. We've got to do something about it quickly. So I'm going to do a bit of a tender for them. But again, I looked at all their products, and as I say, not trying to be too cynical, but the products they sell most of had gone up. Most of them had gone up about 15 to 20%. The ones that they sell the odd bottle of had gone up 1%, 2%, something like that. So yeah, you got to look at it a little bit and think they've bumped it all up where they know they're going to make the extra margin. But there's always value out there. I mean, obviously you've got to be, one of the biggest errors that anyone makes, which I'm sure Simon sees all the time in terms of food, is that some people are just selling wine too cheap. I mean, I'm doing a lot of wine training recently. I did some stuff I'm trying to think when it was now. It was actually while one of these was on, because I had to miss one of these just shortly before Christmas. And I try and talk to staff while I'm doing that about the cost of wine and about generally what it costs and what goes to the government. And I'm trying to make it really approachable to all members of staff, really. So just breaking down the cost of a bottle of wine and showing them, and when people realise that £5 bottle of wine in the supermarket, more than £3 of it has gone straight to the government before you even start. It's people start to realise that when you're trying to make margins to keep a hotel going or keep a restaurant going or something like that, you can't be selling bottles of house wine for 15 quid or anything like that anymore. It's just absolute madness. And I've mentioned before about the wine list reviews I do and the way I structure wine lists, so you can to an extent get away with having a slightly cheaper entry level, because the way the wine list is structured, most people don't spend at that entry level anyway. But yeah, generally I think I've seen it with food. I've got mates who are chefs, and they try and just say to the owners, look, you've got to change this pricing, you've got to change this pricing. And the owners are terrified of losing customers to increase pricing. But obviously with the overheads going where they've gone now, everyone's having to really leap it up. But yeah, like I say, from a training point of view now, a lot of the stuff I'm doing at the moment is I mean, as I say, I'm trying to break down so when they're speaking to their customers, they can actually give them that bit of background about cost of all wine, not just those products that your everyday consumer, when the government does the budget, has absolutely no idea what any of it means about the cost of wine. Your everyday consumer has zero idea that duty on every bottle of wine is minimum £2.23 a bottle. Like that, people just don't know that. Excuse me. So yeah, so trying to kind of educate people a little bit like that. So when people do say, oh, your glass of wine's this much, and you say, well, yeah, but it's a good glass of wine. And just so you're aware, even your £5 cheapest bottle of wine on the supermarket shelf has £2.23 duty in it. Plus the VAT's got in it as well, that £5 bottle of wine on a supermarket shelf. So yeah, just trying to give people that little bit of information, because I do it as a little bit of a quiz when I do the training, and actually say to people, how much from that £5 bottle of wine do you think goes straight to the government? And no one gets it. No one gets it first time.
Yeah, I think the whole story of catering has always been, it's not about the actual product, it's about the service. And I think the problem a lot of places are having now is that they haven't got the staff to give the service, which means the client is relating the price to the actual product rather than to the experience that they've received. And I think over the next few during the current situation, I think there will probably, the two areas of the business will grow apart. The higher level ones will probably get better staff and get a higher level of quality and be charging slightly more, because they'll be catering for the people who still have acquisitional power. And then the other end of the scale will be the people who just can't get the staff and can't go with it, and they'll be going downwards in a spiral to just cater for the people who can't afford to actually go out, just to try and get them to go out. And unfortunately,
until they go out of business, Robin.
Yeah, exactly. I think
because they won't be able to invest in the physical fabric of the building, or cutlery, crockery, any of that sort of stuff. It'll just, as you say, spiral downwards. And then
you're right, it's got to go, all got to go in a certain way now. And I think, as I say, wine being obviously my specialist area, I think, like I say, the vast majority of people have absolutely zero idea of how the cost is, what tax, what duty is actually in the bottle. Whereas I think at least hospitality venues now, energy bills are so well publicized, how much they've gone up, for example. Obviously not for your everyday consumer, not so much the food, then it wouldn't really notice that, but everyone knows that energy costs are absolutely through the ceiling, don't they? And your everyday consumer might not notice when government support for businesses drops, but they know that energy costs go up, don't they? And I think there's so many reasons people have got to pop prices up now. But like I say, a lot of it's just about actually having that understanding of it to convey to people. Because I think, as I say, with a lot of the training I'm doing now, I'm training people on on the wine, general wine stuff, and how to, like, what goes with their food on their menu and things like that. But also I'm doing hospitality focused wine training, where I'm training staff on how to open a bottle of wine, how to pour a bottle of wine, how to what the correct temperatures are of a bottle of wine, because the amount of people that will have, I don't know, a bottle of Prosecco, everyone knows how popular Prosecco is, and people will be serving Prosecco too warm, for example. And if you serve a sparkling wine too warm, when you open it, it goes and fizzes up. You're losing liquid, you're creating a mess, you're delaying the service, etc., etc. So I'm trying to do a lot of that stuff for people, actually just giving them that service and that service training, and then also dealing with like I say, how to talk to the customers, a lot of it, actually how to deal with everyday wine complaints, because certainly when you're having to bring people into hospitality now who haven't necessarily got a hospitality background or are quite new to hospitality, you don't have too much experience, I think beverage and wine especially is quite intimidating for staff. They don't really know how to talk to customers about it, and when a customer does complain about something, they just freeze up and say, oh, I'll ask someone, or whatever it may be. So again, I'm doing stuff where I'm training people on hypothetical, I say hypothetical, but these are typical complaints, things like, what do you do when someone says a wine's corked, or stuff like that. But I think, again, yeah, you've got to be, you want to be making the maximum. You want people to have the maximum, the best possible experience. But yeah, again, you've got to be putting your prices up, and like Simon said, to keep your business open. And I think something like solid drinks list, because it is longer life in terms of what it's doing, is really, really important. But like I say, so many people have no idea how to store wines, how to serve wines, how to open wines, things like that. I mean, for example, I've done some training where some hospitality guys, because all their main volume wines are screw cap, they literally haven't really been opening anything with a corkscrew. So I'm doing training with some people who are working in hospitality but have never opened a bottle of wine with a corkscrew, because so many of the volume products now come in screw cap, understandably. But yeah, when it actually comes down to standing there in front of a customer and trying to open a cork bottle, it's just an absolute, it's terrifying for young staff. It's absolutely terrifying. So but yeah, I think generally there's not, pricing's not going silly, but for me, I don't think that it's changed too much. I think it's just a case of keeping suppliers on their toes and comparing stuff. And yeah, if you've got one supplier that you've used for years and years and years, and you're not asking them for support with stuff, and that you're not getting them to compare their prices, the pricing is going to creep up. Like I say, this one 15 to 20% on all the volume products was just, it did look incredibly dodgy, to be honest. But it is.
I was going to say the same thing, absolutely the same thing about food, Owen. You know, you just got to keep on the case of suppliers and keep looking at stuff, and then also looking at what you do with the stuff once you've got it. So rather than just having a blunt conversation about putting the dish up, Mr. General Manager or Mr. Business Owner, you know, can you look at just slightly re-engineering the dish so that it does meet the required margin at the price that you currently sell it at? Because I can understand business owners not wanting to, you know, break through those psychological barriers of £10 for a starter and perhaps 20, 25 for a main course. But a really good example of, you know, an example of this was, I went to a hotel in South London, did a review with them in November, and had dinner with the general manager. I had a steak. He had the chicken, and he had 4 little baby carrots on the chicken dish. And straight away I'm like, oh God, how much is that? I saw a packet of these carrots come in on the back door the next morning. There was 8 of them in a packet that cost £3. And they come from South Africa. They're air freighted in. You know, they cost virtually the same price as the chicken. So, I said to the general manager, just take them off, do a carrot puree, do a great big, nice braised carrot to go with the dish, which is going to cost you 20 pence rather than £1.20. So I see so much wasted opportunity in food. I really do. And it's just trying to get operators to open their eyes and embrace some change, and reach out for some help. That that's what I find the biggest challenge.
Same everywhere.
Yeah. Once you get invited in, you can find loads of savings, and without having to necessarily change suppliers. Even just change your mindset, change a few products, and anyway, it's fresh new year.
I was actually just going to quickly ask Owen, if that's all right, just a quick question, because I was at 2 restaurants over Christmas and New Year, and I was usually stick to the same wine. I always like a New Zealand Sauvignon de Blanc, and you in a restaurant, a hotel, you don't mind paying 10, 15, 20 pounds even over what you would normally buy in the supermarket. I was at one restaurant, they charged me 40 pounds over what I would expect to pay in a restaurant just for a single bottle of wine. If I'm in a restaurant or a hotel and I'm looking at the wine list and I want to try something new, is there usually a guideline of what the hospitality would put on top of a bottle of wine? Just because I want to try something that is fairly decent, but I don't want to pay £60 for a bottle that's going to cost me 15 in a restaurant, in a
Yeah,
shop.
I unfortunately, Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc is one of those that people will just bump up. I mean, a very good example was not in the UK. My old man was working in Doha. He retired when COVID happened, but he was working out there, and I visited him a few times in the hotels. And alcohol is very expensive out there generally, and all alcohol is served in hotels, so you see the very high pricing. But what's quite a good gauge of the way people tend to do it is, for example, Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc, Prosecco, Malbec, Chablis, these names that people will, because your general person will probably not know 3/4 of wines on a wine list and what they actually are and what they taste like. And Marlborough Sauvignon is the trend white wine. So out in Doha, for example, I'd look at the wine list and they'd have wines like, I found a Minervois from the south of France, this red wine. So I recommended it to my dad when he was doing something with some clients. I said, that's a really, really good wine. That's a good price. Likewise, there's some Italian, on the red wine point of view, some Italian stuff, some Ripasso and things like this. And because they're slightly less known, you're still paying a high margin because you're in a hotel, but relatively the value is so good. So it's tough to have a general rule across the board, but typically anything that's one of those big names, Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc, Prosecco, Malbec, you are going to be paying massively over. I think I mentioned on this group when I did a presentation before, like Prosecco, for example. You see places now doing Prosecco Frizzanti being screw cap, semi-sparkling. It's not even fully sparkling wine. And you see people doing that on lists for, this is outside London, 34, 35 quid now. And it's not even sparkling wine, but what it's got to the point now, same with New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, Malbec, Prosecco, they've become such a brand in their own right that people know, someone picks up a wine list, they just go, oh, yeah, that's the one I know. Prosecco, there's a Prosecco, bang. And I've actually had people say to me, oh, have you got a Prosecco? Because do you know where I can get a good Prosecco? Because I know my one keeps going flat. And then I go and see it and I say it's Frizzanti. It's not going flat. It's semi-sparkling in the first place. But I think Marlborough Sauvignon, what you said, Marlborough Sauvignon is a really tricky one. So I think things like, do you know Albarino? Do you know Albarino, Spanish white wine?
No.
So Albarino is from northwest Spain. You get Alvarinho with a V as well, which is from Portugal, and they're the same. Basically, exactly the same grape. Alvarinho is Portuguese, Albarino is Spanish, but exactly the same grape, just across the border. They spell it differently. And Albarino, you get, so Albarino is the grape, but you get quite Sauvignon style to it. So it's very
Okay.
much seafood style of wine, crisp, fresh, fruity, little bit less in terms of the, New Zealand Sauvignon's got that real in your face fruit, that real
Yep.
powerful tropical fruit. So it's not too in your face in the fruit. It's more of a, Albarino is more of a, but Sancerre in terms of style. So
Okay.
Sancerre is all Sauvignon Blanc as well, but it's
Yep.
more, it's more elegant, if you like, not
Yep.
so in your face with fruit, but a nice fruit alternative. And lots of wineries have Albarinos now, for example.
Okay.
And generally the margin won't be as big. People won't have the margin as big as they will with Marlborough Sauvignon because people don't know it so well. So
Right.
in London, you'll see Albarino by the glass all over the place. But outside of London, not so much.
No.
I think, for example, another nice little tip with Sauvignon Blanc, if you see, this is retail or hospitality, but if you see Sauvignon Blanc, Chilean Sauvignon Blanc from a place called the Leyda Valley, which is Leyda,
Okay.
Leyda, Leyda Valley is basically the best place you can get Sauvignon Blanc in Chile.
Okay.
It's bang on the coast, and you get very similar climate to what you get in Marlborough. So with Chilean Sauvignon Blanc's got a bit of a problem generally in that a few years ago, everyone recognized that Chile was the best value country. And unfortunately in the UK, people don't tend to know what value actually means anymore. They tend to think when they hear the word value, it just means cheap.
Right.
So lots of people started making very, very cheap Chilean Sauvignon Blanc, Chilean Merlot to try and hit price points. However, when Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc had this real harvest issue, that last vintage, lots of wine lists were putting South African Sauvignon Blancs, French Sauvignon Blancs, Chilean Sauvignon Blancs on the list because they couldn't get Marlborough. And if you see just any old Chilean Sauvignon Blanc, generally it tends to be, if it's an entry-level Chilean Sauvignon Blanc, it tends to be fairly light, not too much flavour to it, and just tastes sort of slightly like lemon and lime. Whereas those Leyda Valley wines, say for example, if you get like a Tesco Finest or a Sainsbury's Taste the Difference Chilean Sauvignon Blanc, it might not be Leyda Valley, but generally it probably would be. They generally try and get it from the Leyda Valley. So again, if you've got a wine list where the Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc is 55, 60 quid, like you've just referred to, and they have other Sauvignon Blanc that might be 27 quid, 28 quid, or Albarino, you'll probably quite enjoy it.
Okay.
But unfortunately, Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc is just one of those that
they put any price on it.
Yeah, people will just make the maximum out of.
Well, I'm going to go shopping now to buy some Sauvignon Blanc and some venison. So thanks to you both for my dinner recommendations this evening.
Perfect. Cheers, Rob.
All right.
One of the problems that has been in hospitality for years is the fact that they always want to sell their liquor, wine, and I've been fighting against it for years, doing budgets, and they're saying, well, you have to make at least 70% GP on it. And so the markup has been tremendous. And some of it's even more than that. Now that's a traditional thing. Everybody wants to sit down at budget, and if you gave them the margin was going to be 65%, well, we can't get that. No, you need to change that. You need to stick it up. We need to make minimum 70 and probably more than that. That's why wine and hospitality is so expensive, because it's been a traditional thing. I've always advocated that we should be looking at selling a lower margin and selling a bigger volume of it. I mean, that's why many of the wine lists, I'm an ex-sommelier many years ago, and I've been to Argentina and Australia and New Zealand, to the wine regions and that. So I've been trying to advocate that, we've got bottles of wine sitting in the wine list and we're selling like one a month or maybe one every 3 months. So why have you got that in the wine list? You've got it priced too high, and it's a really nice wine, but it's not going to move. Price it cheaper and move it. Either that or take it off the wine list. But it's a traditional thing in hospitality that the people have always wanted to have this high margin, low volume.
You're right.
And I've never managed to change that in any of the establishments that I've ever been involved in.
Cameron, I think you're right. I think that what tends to happen, I've dealt with hotel operators before where the general manager or whoever it may be who's trying to get my help with the wine list says, oh yeah, we'll make cash margin on that, we'll make cash margin on that rather than percentage. Then they sit down with one of the owners of the business who's literally just looking at numbers, and they say, hang on a minute, that should be 70, why is that not 70? And it's funny because, as you say, when you get to a decent quality wine, so say for example, I don't know, white burgundies and things, now they're very expensive wines anyway. So if you take a set 70% GP on something like that, now you're absolutely right, Cameron, you won't sell anything because it'll be on your list for 130 odd quid, whereas actually you could set a solid cash margin on it and show your customer, I mean, you're not giving it away, you still make, but if you take a straight, your cash margin could be, I don't know, 40 quid a bottle or something like that. And you still, so your GP will actually be lower, but every single time you sell one of those bottles, it's 40 quid straight in. Whereas if you're selling house wines or something like that, you might be making £15 a bottle every time. But you know, you're absolutely right. I've dealt with a few people like that where they've said, oh yeah, we'll make cash margin on those premium wines. And then they go off and speak to the actual owners and the guys at the top who are just looking at the figures, and they say, hang on a minute, why is that not 70? And then, like you say, they end up sitting on it. They just end up sitting there, and people come in and say, hang on a minute, I can get that wine far cheaper than that. And as I say, white Burgundy or red Burgundy, white Burgundy, Bordeaux, they're a disaster like that, because if you start putting 70% on things like that, people only, with wines like that, it's only people who really know wine that will order it, and the people who really know wine know what it costs. So you end up in a real disastrous situation like that when people try to just put set percentage margin on. And I think, as I say, if you do your wine list cleverly, like we just referred to then in terms of the Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc, with white wine especially, 99% of orders, unless you've got a sommelier, or unless you're pairing wine to food, or unless you've really trained your team to the point where they can recommend something a little bit unusual that matches your dishes, 99% of hospitality venues, the top sellers, if they've got 2 Sauvignon Blancs by the glass, the top sellers will be Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc, followed by the other Sauvignon Blanc, followed by the Pinot Grigio. They'll be the 3 top sellers on the whole wine list, not just in the whites. And they will account for 90% of the overall sales of the wine list. And so, again, talking about, people will tend to just pump their additional margin into those products, knowing that actually the customers are going to order those products. Whereas actually, for example, English wine often struggles because the price point it gets bought in at means it sits, say for example, a nice English white wine like a Bacchus will often sit above a Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc on a wine list in terms of price point. And once people go up the wine list, they're going to have to be pretty patriotic to actually go past the very, very popular Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc and say, I'm going to spend another 5 quid and go English. So there's lots of problems like that in terms of the way you structure a list. And the way I've always built wine lists is that things like Chablis for white wine, Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc for white wine, Malbec for red wine, you've got to have them in the right places, and you've got to have stuff beneath them. So I mentioned Albarino before. Don't put, generally, I wouldn't try and put Albarino above the Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc. If you have it below it, it's a really, really interesting wine that people will give a go to. But if it sits, say, 5 quid more expensive than it just won't move. And again, exactly like you say, Cameron, you want to sell the product. You want people to have a good experience, and you want to sell the products, and you want to get money in the till. And I think when it gets to premium wines, cash margins are absolutely the way forward. But like I say, I've witnessed it firsthand where someone said to me, yeah, we'll do a cash margin there. And then one of their bosses has just said, no, 70%. And it's so rigid, but it does happen all the time.
And other times people have far too many wines on their wine list anyway. You know, and I was at a place and they had 45 wines on. I had a quick analysis and have a look at it and say, so how many of these are selling? And there's less than 10 that are movers. And they've got like almost 30 odd wines that are sitting there that have cost them money, moving nowhere.
Yeah.
And you think you need to reduce your wine list to say 28, maybe 25, and make sure that the ones that are going to move, rather than having 45 and 10 of them moving and the rest of them are sitting doing nothing. You're just tying up money.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think because what will happen with a lot of merchants as well, a lot of the big merchants, what they do, they fight over the big brands. So they fight to have the UK, the English or the Scottish representation of that brand. So once they become the agent of that brand, they take it off their rival big wine merchants. And these brands are powerful enough that what they do is then they have customers chase them for those brands. So someone will say, oh, who's the agent for so-and-so? They find out who you are. They get in touch with you. They say, I want to stock that. And then all of a sudden, the merchant says to them, oh, well, yeah, oh, fine. Okay, we'll send one of our reps in to speak to you. Obviously, they're not going to just order that. And then what ends up happening is because they're the person who has that product, the company that's the agent for it tends to then name their price on a lot of other stuff that isn't quite as competitive as it should be, because partly because you're trying to justify orders as well, because you're bringing in this supplier because you need to get that wine from them. But then also what they do, a lot of these merchants, they will take on a producer. So they'll take on a producer from wherever it be, Italy, California, whatever it might be, and they will have contracted minimum volumes for what they have to sell in order to remain the agent for that wine. So that winery, so some of these big wine brands, they move quite a lot amongst the big merchants because no one can really hit what they want. But what happens, and this is where your hospitality operators really struggle with the wines, is that your merchants will come in, and just like you referred to then, you've got 45 wines on your list. Why do you have 45? You need 25, for example. But what the merchants will do is they'll have set ranges that they'll put in front of the customer, and they'll say, here you go, here's our wine list we've proposed for you. So they'll put this out in front of you. They'll say, here's our wine list we've proposed for you. It's not the wine list they've proposed for you. It's the wine list they've proposed for the last 35 customers they've walked in the door, and they've chucked your logo on the top. But what it is they will have, and I've seen it loads and loads of times, there'll be 5, 10, 15 wines on that list that are not good for your business. They're good for their business because it's wines that they're struggling to sell in general. So what they're doing is they put it on every wine list amongst all their customer base. If all of you have got 6 bottles in your building, they hit their sales target for what they've sold of the product, because it's a tough one to sell. So as a result of that, you end up getting wine lists like that all the time, where there's boatloads of products on there. Like, I don't know, I've seen a wine list where they had about 6 Malbecs, and you think, well, yeah, Malbec's popular, but there's absolutely no reason for you to have 6 Malbecs. The only person that's winning out of that is your supplier, because your stock holding is going to be so high, keeping up with all those products that you just don't need. But as I say, it's a bit of a background for it. I've seen it so many times. They have these template wine lists. Look, here's the wine list we put together for you. They'll tell you your logo on it, but it's the same range they're putting into everyone they're walking in the door, because it's got the products on it that they need to sell, not the products that work for your wine list, the products that they need to sell. So it's again, that's why you've got to keep an eye on it, because again, stock holding can be an absolute disaster, and which is another thing I'm doing in terms of training, trying to teach people in terms of past stocks and placing orders. And if you've got premium wine, have a past stock of say 3-4 bottles, and if you sell one, order one. Whereas some suppliers try, and whether you need to or not, they try and almost ease you towards doing 6 bottles of everything, which obviously when you're doing wines by the glass and things like that, you want 6 bottles of everything. There's no point ordering 4 bottles of something that's by the glass. You just get 6 every time, get a full case. But premium, you don't want to be adding those bits all the time. So again, something I talk to people about is past stock levels. Get your past stocks, and just, yeah, sell 1 bottle, buy 1 bottle. If it's 80 quid on your list, don't order 6 bottles, don't order 3 bottles. Stock up. Excellent. And hit that past stock.
Excellent advice from both of you. And I think we have to call it a day now. We've already overrun from the hour, which is which is good. Thank you very much all for joining me, and hope to see you all again next month.
Cheers, Robin.
This is all very interesting. Thank you, everybody. This is Mark and Owen and Simon. It was all very interesting. Thanks, Robin.
Owen and Simon, you ought to team up, because there are so many synergies between food and drink and debunking.
We already have, Mark.
Good.
Excellent.
Catch you all soon.
See you all.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.